Okay, so I'd like to say welcome everyone. This is the second webinar of the Africa ELTA Research Mentoring Program. We are hosting today Richard Smith, who is going to talk to us about developing research tools. The first webinar focused on developing research questions. And today we have some questions from our mentees that we're going to discuss during the session to look for the best way to develop the tools to start investigating the topics that you have selected for your research. Without further ado, I'm going to give it to you, Richard. We are going to also have time for questions and answers. And of course, feel free to type your questions in the chat box during the session. And at the end, you can, of course, use your mics if you want to discuss anything. Richard, it's over to you.
So thanks, Amira. Thank you for inviting me for this second webinar. May I ask if we could perhaps introduce ourselves? Well, this is being recorded, of course, so if you feel that you would not like to say who you are, that's fine. But would you mind telling me who, Amira, maybe how many teachers, how many mentors we have today with us? Or who?
In the program, we have 13 teacher
Yeah,
researchers,
yeah,
and we have 10 mentors.
yeah. And okay. And how many teachers today with us now, right now?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6.
Okay, great. And the others maybe will be listening to this on the recording because
Yes.
they can't make it. Yeah, I understand. Okay, great. Well, last time we talked about the process of going from a problem or a question, an issue in your classroom, trying to narrow down the issue and thinking of research questions which can come from that problem or that issue. And today we're going to move into thinking how you can actually go about finding answers to questions that you have about your teaching. But I'm going to begin by just a little bit more about the kind of teacher research that I'm talking about, the kind of practitioner research or teacher research that I'm focusing on, just so that we are clear about that together. So that's my title. I'm going to start with a little bit about what I call exploratory action research, because there are different kinds of teacher research, and I think this is the kind that I'm going to be discussing. So the example, I think, the examples we gave last time were also examples of exploratory action research. Depending on you and your mentor, you may be taking this approach, or you may be taking a slightly different approach. Ideas about exploratory action research came from this program in Chile originally. It was a British Council project. These teachers are secondary school teachers. They have quite busy schedules. They have up to 40 hours per week. And they're teaching in secondary schools with classes of about average 40 children in the week. So they're not in a very privileged situation. They do have many issues, problems connected with their teaching in low resource contexts. And I think that maybe some of you will sympathize with the kind of context that they face. And that worked in Chile and Peru, Colombia, and Mexico. This same approach, exploratory action research, we used it together with teachers also in India and Nepal over a period of number of years. I'm going to share, last time I shared some examples of teachers researching their classrooms, just as you are going to be researching your classrooms. I'm going to share one more example, and the example will be from Nepal. But anyway, teacher research. This is teacher research. This is teachers doing research into their own teaching. So what do we mean by that? Well, research done by teachers into issues which concern them. And you have been thinking about the issue that you'd like to research, and you're coming up with questions at the moment. So it's addressing questions that arise from your practice. I suppose we're presenting this as something practical and useful for you, not as something that you have to do for a university degree. This is something that teachers have found can be quite useful and practical in their classrooms as a way to understand what they are doing, understand issues, sometimes address problems that they are facing. But basically, research involves questions. It involves coming from questions to get answers by gathering data. Data means information which will help you to answer a question, a research question. So today we're going to focus on that. We're going to focus on how to get data. What kinds of data will help you to answer your questions. Then, of course, you've got to analyze the data. Well, we're not going to talk about that so much today. Then sharing what you find. That's it. That's a process. That's one process of. That's one definition of research. It's research done by teachers. By teachers, for teachers. It's research done that teachers want to do for themselves, for their own development, for understanding something better, for addressing problems, and of course for your students. That's why we teach. So I'm going to talk about two kinds of research, two kinds of teacher research, and these are exploratory research and action research. I'm putting these together with first doing exploratory research and then doing action research. We get exploratory action research. I'm defining what I mean by exploratory action research, and I'm also going to explain why I think this is quite a good approach to teacher research. And if you read the stories in that book that I mentioned last time that came from Africa ELTA from the last time, I noticed that a lot of the teachers were doing exploratory research, and maybe some of them were going into action research. So let's see what we mean by this. Exploratory research means planning to explore an issue, and you have questions that you associate with that stage. That's where we are now. You're planning to explore with questions. You're also planning how to get information, how to get data. That's the next stage, because you're going to explore. But now we're planning, aren't we? We're planning. You've got the questions. Now we're thinking what data, what kinds of data will I need to answer my questions? And when you have a plan, then you're going to go and explore. You're going to gather data. I try to explain research in a very down to earth way. Some people might think it's too simple, too simplistic, but I think research is something that can be quite down to earth, quite practical. But data is a word, a jargon word, but it's a useful word because it means evidence or information to answer questions, to answer research questions. And then you've got to analyze the data and reflect on it. And it's because we get data, we get students' opinions, or we get another teacher to observe our class and tell us what they see, that kind of data. That's why we can call it research, because we're getting data. We're not just reflecting, we're not just thinking about our problem, we're actually getting data, and that makes it research and not just reflective teaching. Because I think reflective teaching is what we do quite a lot of the time as teachers, but we're actually going to go and get data to answer our questions. That makes it research. So that's exploratory research, quite simply. That's the process. And that's what we start with. Here are the teachers in Chile. They're talking together about the problems they share, and they together are thinking about some questions that they want to answer. And then they're going to plan what kinds of information they need. I remember that one issue they had, for example, this group, was how can we get parents to be more involved in supporting their children at home to learn. Of course, that is a really important issue for teachers, and especially in the pandemic, it was very important. This was before the pandemic. They were already thinking about that. So that was their overall question. So they had questions like research questions like, well, what do parents do now to support their children? They thought that probably parents don't do very much, but they had to go and check to find out. So what do parents do to support their children? Then they have to think, well, how can I get some data? And what they decided was to make a kind of questionnaire to send to parents, but also to have some groups of parents to talk to them about what they do at the moment. That was their data. And then they went further. They had other questions too, like what kind of support at home do students say they would like to have? And I think they did the same kind of getting the same kind of data with questionnaire and with talking to some small groups of children. So exploratory research means planning to explore something. That's what we are doing now. Actually exploring, and then analyzing and reflecting and seeing what they find. You could stop there. You could, if you understood the problem, understood the issue better. But actually, we find that many teachers then want to go and try to improve the situation through some sort of new action, some kind of change. For example, those teachers in Chile, they then decided they want to try to change the situation. So they planned, because they found that parents are not really supporting their children as much as maybe the children said they would really like. And they decided to have some sorts of, not training exactly, but some meetings with parents where they would explain to parents what kinds of support would be valuable for their children. Because that's one thing they discovered, that actually parents wanted to help, but they weren't sure what to do. And that's what they found from their exploration. So because of that, they were able to plan a good change, action, to try to improve the situation. So they went into action research after exploratory research. So yeah, what they did next was they did action research after exploratory research. They planned an action this time. They planned a new action, which was to have meetings with parents. So they acted on that. What I'm describing here is action research. They observed what happened. So they saw what happened. They didn't just see what happened, they actually asked children about with questionnaire, and they asked parents with a questionnaire. So they did the same thing. They tried to find out if there was any improvement from the situation before, and reflected on what they found. I think they found that there was some improvement, but there were other things that they could do, and so they went into some more action or some more exploration. So basically, that's exploratory action research. Some teachers prefer to stop with exploratory research. Other teachers like to move on to do some action research. So exploratory action research is exploration followed by some action. Or you can, we present it in this way. It's just the same thing, just with some steps. Exploration and then action. So today I'm going to be thinking with you about just the exploration stage. Okay, we're going to think about questions that you have. How can you explore those questions to find answers, to get data and find answers? Yeah. So I'll just share another example. So remember, these are the stages of, first of all, of action research. This is just action research. So this teacher says, my students are not motivated. And many teachers have this as a starting point for research. Now, remember, this teacher is not exploring first. This teacher is just going to try something out to improve the situation. So they plan and design an action plan. And what do? They have internet access. So they decide to teach English through online videos. using more YouTube, because they think, this teacher thinks, that will motivate the students. They observe it. So they observe means not only look with your eyes, but also ask with your mouth, and to ask their students their perceptions with I think this teacher asked a question, used a small questionnaire, or maybe this teacher, I think they just got the students to write some reflections at the end of the class on a piece of paper about what do you think about YouTube videos, how do you feel about them. So the ways of getting data that I'm going to talk about are quite down to earth, and we have to think of things which are not going to interfere with your teaching too much, which will not give you too much extra burden, because you're already very busy teachers, and you don't have maybe time to develop big questionnaire or getting data which requires you to do a lot of extra work. That's not what I want to talk about with you. I want to talk about ways to get data in a simple way which don't interfere with too much with your teaching. So that teacher asked the students just to write their reflections about the YouTube videos and on a piece of paper, and to give the piece of paper with no name, just everybody's reflections. But they also asked a colleague to come and observe their class and see what happened. So the teacher analysed the results. That, in this case, because the teacher got lots of different opinions from teachers, all on different pieces of paper, he put them together into groups. So these students think this, these students think this, these students think this. All these pieces of paper they put into piles according to what the students were saying. That's analysing. And you don't have to count, in this case, you can't count because the students have lots of different opinions, and maybe seeing what's the majority opinion. In fact, some students seem to become more motivated from the conclusion. So they continued with their action plan, but they added extra actions. Now, let me give you an example of exploratory action research, which is a bit different. Same starting point. My students are not motivated, but this teacher doesn't immediately think how to change the situation. They want to explore the situation first. So they're going to plan to find, to get data about this issue, to explore whether students really are not motivated, because that's what the teacher thinks that they are. But remember, last week we talked about how sometimes our assumptions about the classroom are not always correct. We need to just check that our perception is the same as what students think, or that the reality is really as we think it is. So this teacher asked the students their perceptions and about the class, and asked a colleague to observe the class, just to find out whether they are motivated or not, and what they say would motivate them. So this teacher analysed the results and made conclusions. My students would actually like speaking more in class. That's what the students were saying. And so the teacher planned and designed an action plan based on students' perceptions. They decided to teach more conversation in the class, teach more oral things in the class. Now, this teacher's plan is different from the last teacher's plan. This teacher's plan actually corresponds better with what the students themselves are perceiving. So, but the same thing, this is action research, ask the students what they think about the new classes, and analysing and making conclusions. The students are more engaged, but they need more practice. Now, the difference here is that the plan comes from the exploration. The plan comes out of what the teacher finds in that first exploration. So the plan is likely to be more appropriate, likely to be better plan than just springing into action, just going into action, because that's what we always do as teachers. We have a problem and we think we find the solution, and we just jump into a solution. But the thing about exploratory research is you can step back and try to see what the actual the nature of the problem is. In this case, it's likely that this is a better plan because YouTube videos would not really satisfy what students themselves are saying, which is that they want more speaking, not more listening. Okay, so that's exploratory action research. And I'm going to give you, so the examples I'm giving you and the topics, the sort of the ideas I'm sharing come from that project in Latin America. And you can find stories of teachers doing exploratory action research in this book. And I think I shared some stories last time, or a story from last time from one of these books in Mexico, Chile, or Peru. And there's also a handbook which I made with Paula Rebiedo. Together, we made a handbook for teachers to use to help them with their exploratory action research. And I know that that we shared that with you last time. You can Google it, so you can find it online, but just by looking for the title. I think that link doesn't work very well, actually. And here are some of the teachers in Nepal that I've worked with doing exploratory action research. They do have quite large classes. I don't know how many pupils you have in your classes. I know Harry Kuchar used to tell me that he had very large classes when he was teaching in Cameroon. And I'm going to share an example actually from another book, which is edited by one of the mentors in Nepal. So let me share another example, and then we'll come to the topic of how to get data. But let me share one example. And her name is Shova Shahi, and she teaches in Nepal. Is, I don't know, it's above India, and it's got very near the Himalayan mountains. And she teaches these children. This is one of her classes, and her problem was that she had she felt that her classroom was overcrowded and very difficult to manage, and students used to make a disturbance. And she tried different things, changing the seats of the students every day, giving authority to the class monitor, dividing students into different groups, but she couldn't get any success. So she came up with these questions with her mentor, to explore the situation. She had a general idea, but she wasn't quite clear what the real problem was. What particular difficulties do I have in the class, and what causes the disturbance in the classroom? So how to get answers, these are her research methods, and this is what we're talking about today, your research methods, your tools, practical tools. One thing was to get a colleague to observe her class, and the other was a kind of self-observation, taking notes about what happened, so immediately after the class, and maybe if she could, then during the class as well. She found that most of the students were paying attention. Some sitting in the windows were looking outside and talking to others about what they saw. Some other students were talking about those who were looking outside the windows. So she found what the problem was better. So that's what she did, and she found, and then she made an action plan. So she's moving into action research. She gave more responsibility to the students sitting by the windows, and she would move closer to the students who were talking unnecessarily with their friends. So she would move over there. And she gave specific, so this is what her action was. She gave specific tasks to those by the windows. Tasks like these. And when she noticed students talking unnecessarily, she would move nearer to them. And that was her action, simple action. You can see her, she's moving there. She gave tasks to them as well. And she noticed that this had changed. This had happened afterwards. She said it changed drastically. So it really changed. Students don't talk unnecessarily. Instead, they concentrate more. They haven't stopped talking completely, but they've started talking about the subject matter, not about what's going on outside outside in the street. So that's just one example. Another example of exploratory action research. Remember, planning to explore. planning to explore. That's what we're doing now. And then analyzing and then doing it, exploring and analyzing what you find. Then if you want to go into the action research, planning a new action, and then observing and reflecting. Now, just to emphasize, why is it valuable to explore first before jumping into some action? This is what Daniel Santana says. He's a teacher in Chile. And he thought that he tried to teach using English in the classroom. He tried to use English when he was teaching English. But he thought that students didn't like it. He thought that the students didn't understand him. He thought that they wanted him to change. But he really wanted to continue to try to use English and not use their mother tongue too much. So he was intending to reduce the amount of English in his classroom, but we encouraged him to explore the situation first, to really find out what the real situation was, because it may have just been some students who were complaining. Maybe other students were okay, were happy. That's what we told him. So he wasn't quite sure which students were happy or which students were not unhappy. And when you're not sure about something, that becomes a good question to explore. So he explored, and by a questionnaire, and he found that it was very surprising for him, because he thought they didn't want the class to be in English. But in their answers, a majority, more than half, said they wanted the class in English. And he said it was a total change of my point of view. So therefore, I can't remember what he did, I think maybe he just, that was enough. He had found out what most of the class wanted. Maybe yeah. So why explore before you take action? Why do exploratory research before you do action? Because you need some evidence to help you understand or solve a problem or puzzle better, instead of just jumping into an action without a good foundation. Needing to understand before you go into action. You also need to have a baseline, something to compare what happens before and after. If you are going to do a new action, you need to find out what the situation is now. Also, I think it's not so burdensome to go gradually into exploring and then to plan some action research, a kind of experiment. So we think there are lots of reasons for exploring before action. Okay, now I'm going to move into the main topic today, which is tools for answering exploratory research questions. And think about your own questions. And here are some suggestions for different kinds of data that can answer teachers' research questions. But these are all different kinds of data that teachers that we have worked with actually use. So these are all things that are practical, in the sense that they are not too burdensome. They're not too much of an extra heavy load for a busy teacher. Remember, these are teachers who work in quite difficult situations with a large class or busy teachers, as I'm sure you are. And so that's the kind of practical tool that we recommend. And so there are 12 different sorts of data here. No teacher uses all of these. You don't use all of these for your research. You select which ones will be the best for your particular questions. So it all depends on what are your questions. Certain questions lead to certain kinds of data. Okay, so let's think about that in a minute. Let's just remember which ones of these did, for example, Shova, the teacher in Nepal, which ones did she use? Let's have a look. She used she used number 10, a critical friend. So a critical friend just means, another teacher who is willing to sit in your class. And that may be available for you. It may not be available for you. Some of these might be practical for you. Some of them might not be practical for you. We've just got to find out which is best in your situation and which is best according to your own research questions. So I'm going to encourage you to think about your own situation. So number 10 was somebody observing your class, somebody sitting at the back of your class, and you tell them what you want to find out. You tell them what your questions are, and they are going to write notes just to answer your question, not notes about everything that's going on in your class, but you tell them what to look at, and you ask them to write some notes. Actually, she also did what she called a kind of self-observation, notes about her lesson by herself. And of course, that's not completely objective. It's not completely from the outside. But it did mean that she was able to notice things that she hadn't noticed before. She also noticed for the first time that it was the students. So one of her questions was, which students, or what's the reason for the disturbance? And because she was focusing on that question, and she took some notes immediately after her class. I think it's maybe like, it's number 1, isn't it? Your own written reflections or notes. But it was based on what she saw. So it's a little bit like number 10. Number 1 is your own written reflections or notes. So writing can answer some questions, writing about what you believe or what you think about something. Taking notes like Shova after her class. Number 2, other people's written ideas on the topic. Well, that could be reading something, reading opinions or reading ideas, maybe on the internet, maybe in a newsletter or journal, which can answer some questions. Number 3, you can go and you can have conversations with colleagues if the question is something like, what do other teachers do in this situation? Number 4 would be asking students to write a little bit for you. Like, I think one example I gave was that the teacher asked the students to write what they thought about YouTube videos, just at the end, 5 minutes or 2 or 3 minutes at the end of the class, on a piece of paper. That the teacher gave the piece of paper to the students and asked them to write. It could be in their own language, or it could be in English. And I think sometimes that's even better than a questionnaire, because you can get lots of different opinions from students, and it doesn't take so much time to do for a teacher. Focus group means, number 5, a group of parents or the teachers in Chile who ask parents about their about supporting students. That was a focus group. They got a group of parents to discuss with them, and then or you can have interviews or chats with individuals. Could be individual parents, individual teachers. As I said, remember, some of these will be useful for you. Some of them will not be useful for your situation or for your question. Okay, you've got to think about your questions, what is useful for answering your questions, and what is possible in your context. Sometimes not possible to do some things. Questionnaire, number 7. But it's just, remember, research doesn't have to be with a questionnaire. Many teachers think, I'm going to do some research, I must use a questionnaire. But using a questionnaire is not always necessary, okay? It can take rather a lot of time to prepare a good questionnaire. So sometimes think about other ways of doing the same thing. For example, number 4 could be another way of getting students' opinions, reflective writing. Sometimes your plans or your materials can help to answer questions. So looking at your plan again. Number 9, sometimes recording a lesson, maybe using a mobile phone or getting a recording and then listening to the recording later can be useful. One example would be, for example, a teacher is wondering about the instructions they give. So the problem is students don't seem to understand the instructions that they give for different activities. And so one question is, well, what do I say when I give instructions? And then how do students respond when I give my instructions? Okay, well, one way to answer that could be number 10, to have somebody watch your lesson. But you could also actually answer part of the question by making a recording and then listening to the recording and just writing down what you say every time you give an instruction and analyzing the way that you ask, the way that you give instructions. That could be quite good for that question. Number 10, we've talked about already. Number 11, sometimes photographs can be a useful way to answer a question. And finally, number 12, what students actually do when they do homework or when they do pair work in the class, for example, can be important. For example, a teacher says, I'm not happy with my students' writing. I want them to be able to write better. Okay, well, maybe the research question is, how do students write now? What are the things that they do that are not good? And you have to analyze the writing. You have to get the writing and analyze it to find out exactly what sorts of mistake or what sorts of writing should be improved. So that would be one way to answer that particular question. Now, as I said, you're going to choose from these or from other methods, other kinds of data to answer your questions. And each question that you have might be answered by a different kind of data. Depends on the kind of question that you have. So let me just remind you of different kinds of questions that you might have. You might have, some of your questions might be about your own perceptions. Like, let's say that my students don't participate as much as I would like in the class. It'd be quite useful to ask yourself, well, what do I mean by participate? Because participate can mean different things. It can mean answering my questions when I ask a question to the whole class, or it can mean they don't work on tasks when I give them a task to do, written writing, for example, or it could mean paying attention. So asking yourself, what do I mean by participation, could be a good question here. Or what do I think about something, or why do I think something happens, or what do I want to see happening instead of something? These kinds of questions, if your questions are like this, let's see what kinds of data would be useful from here. What do you think? Could you write in the chat, what for this kind of question, exploring your own perceptions, which ones from here, from here, do you think would be useful? So this is the teacher's perceptions, your own perceptions. Could you write some numbers in the chat, if you don't mind? Just write the number of the kind of data that would be useful. If you can write. Okay. So you've said number 1, yes, absolutely. Your own written reflections, right? So you could imagine that this teacher is going to write some little paragraph about what do I mean by. participation, for example. Okay. I think also maybe, let's have a look. Sometimes actually reading what others have written about participation, if you can search on the internet for participation, what does it mean? That can also help you. So maybe number 1 and number 2 in combination. It could help you to talk to some other colleagues. You know, what do you mean by, what do you feel about participation? What do we mean by participation? What do we want students to do when we say we want them to participate? It could be number 3 as well. Let's think about others' perceptions. So what do my students think about their participation in class, for example? If that's your research question, I think my students don't participate. What do my students say about speaking in class? Let's imagine this teacher has decided that for them, participation means speaking out in class. When the teacher asks a question, what do my students think about answering my questions in the class? Or maybe, what do my colleagues think about how to increase students' participation? That would, if your question is like that. These are about others' perceptions. Let's have a look again at these ones. So, others' perceptions. Which kinds of data would be useful, do you think? Just write in the chat. Students' perceptions, or certainly number 6, notes, interviewing. You can chat to students if you can interview students. And Sandrine says number 3. Yeah, definitely. If you're going to be asking colleagues what they think about a particular situation, yep. And you're saying 7. Yes, questionnaire for sure. And possibly, I think number 10 is mainly about observing behavior. Actually, we're going to come to that in a minute. Yeah. Not so much about opinions or perceptions. Although, yeah, because you're going to ask, you're not going to ask your friend just to give their opinion about your class. You want them to actually give you some proper data about what actually happens in the class, I think. Yeah, okay. I would also say number 5. You can get opinions or perceptions from focus group interview. Remember, that's getting a group of people together, number 5, whereas number 6 is asking individuals. That's the only difference between number 5 and number 6. And number 7, number 4 as well. Don't forget number 4, because I'm suggesting that number 4 can be a very good way to get students' perceptions. If they're writing something for you, a little piece of paper about the class, you're asking a particular question, they're writing about it for you. They don't have to put their name, they don't have to write their name. You can get quite deep views, maybe sometimes, not always, but sometimes, about what's going on. Sometimes much better than a questionnaire. So finally, this is another group of questions that teachers often have, exploring behavior. For example, how often does it happen that students don't understand my instructions? When does it happen? So what kind of instructions do students understand or not understand? This is behavior, isn't it? You've got to look at their behavior and whether they act or not according to understanding your instructions. What do I do or say when I give an instruction? And what do my students do when I give instructions? These kinds of questions, the behavior. So let's go back. What's your answer here? Which ones would be good for kind of behavior or performance? You write in the chat now. To really find out better what students are doing in the class. Number 10, Sandrine, thank you. Yes, because I've said that observing, getting someone to observe what's happening is probably the best way. Yes, but also definitely number 12. If it's something to do with behavior, as in performance, in writing, or how well they do something in English, how well they speak in class, or how well they understand what's being done. You can observe, you can see what they do on tasks. You can give them tasks and see whether they perform well or not. So all of you are writing number 12, possibly number 11. It depends on what sort of thing. Photos, of things. I can't remember if I gave you an example last week of a teacher from Chile. His name was Mauro, and he was interested in how do students behave in pairs or on their own or in groups. I don't think I did, but he used pictures to try to show the differences in the class of how the tables were arranged. Yes, and sometimes number 8 it can be useful, where the teacher, if you have a lesson plan, then the teacher after the class just writes what actually happened in each part of the lesson plan, as opposed to what they hoped would happen. That can be useful for comparing what they hoped to do and what actually happened in the class. Number 9 is also very useful, but it involves maybe a mobile phone recording. If it's useful if you're thinking about your own voice, your own way of speaking in the class. Lesson recordings. So in other words, how do I speak, or what do I do? What do I say in certain situations? Can be really useful. And to record your class, putting the mobile phone or the recorder near you to record, if your mobile phone can record, or some kind of audio recorder near you so that it hears your voice, but it doesn't really capture the students' responses. That's the problem. Now, if you have video, then that can be useful, but video recording means that sometimes people's behavior changes, doesn't it, just because they're being video recorded. And it's difficult for a teacher to record themselves. So you often need a friend to help you. So we've seen how certain kinds of question can be answered by certain kinds of data. Yeah. So let's look at an example here, and maybe you can suggest to this teacher what kinds of data you think they should get. Now, this teacher, and then we will move to some of your questions and discuss kinds of data for your own questions. Right. So this teacher, the topic is my students speak in English only to me, but not to each other. So the teacher asks a question in English, the students answer in English, but when they have pair work, when they have working in pairs, the teacher wants them to speak to each other in pairs in English, but they don't. They speak in their L1, their mother tongue. And so we've helped this teacher to come up with some research questions to explore the problem. And these questions are, well, in what parts of the class do I think students speak to me? So they do speak in English, but why do they speak to you? So if answering this question could help to improve the situation, if you can discover why some students do speak to him in English. But also, why do I think it's important for them to speak to one another in English? That's a good question, just to clarify this teacher's beliefs, perceptions. In what parts? So let's take that second one. Why do I think it's important for them to speak to one another in English? How could this teacher answer that question? Why do I think it's important for them to speak to one another in English? Well, I'll provide the answers from. It's just like last time. Basically, they could write some reflections. Number 1, number 2, by reading, and number 3, 1, 2, 3. That's what I'd suggest. What do my students think about this? You answer this one. What do my students think about this? What would you do in this situation? Write the number, please. Yeah, great, Yusra, thanks. So you've suggested a number 4, I think, and so that's Husseini, reflective writing by students. I think that's what I would do as well, number 4. So what do my students, so I would say to students, right, I noticed that when you answer my questions, you answer them in English, but you tend to speak in to each other using whatever language, not English. So on a piece of paper, take this piece of paper, I give them all a small piece of paper and ask them, please tell me why do you use English? Why do you not use English? Okay, what's the difficulty? What's the issue? And they would write for about 5 minutes, and I'd get all the pieces of paper, and I'd have some data. I'd have some interesting data. Last one, in pair work, which students do and don't speak in English? Let's answer that one, because not all of the students maybe. So which students do or don't speak in English? How could we answer that? Just write the number. Which students do or don't speak in English? How can we answer that question? Can some of you write the answer? Maybe 3. Yeah, okay. I was looking more for, it's actually what actually happens, what actually happens in the classroom. Who speaks in a pair, who doesn't speak in a pair? I'm thinking of more like maybe number 9, perhaps, but yeah, maybe if it's a video recording. It's very difficult to get a video of the whole class, I would suggest, if possible, number 10, because getting somebody to observe your class, a friend, if possible, just to see which students are speaking English, which students are not speaking English. Okay, thanks, Chadia. So you said number 10, you meant number 10. But also maybe, so really number 10, I think, but also what we saw the teacher, Shova, the teacher from Nepal, doing, which was taking notes themselves about what was happening in the classroom. So like number 1, really. Okay, I think that's enough for you've got a good idea of some possible kinds of data, and I've just put these different sorts of data under the kinds of question that they might be useful for answering. And basically, you choose which kind of data you think. What kind of question do I have? So therefore, what kind of data will be most useful? And you can think about that, of course, with your mentor. They'll help you to be thinking about that. So basically, that's what I wanted to share with you. But if you like, we could look at some of the questions that I know that some of you have, because Amira has shared these with me, and I could just comment on maybe some of these. So we've got for example, here research questions, teacher researcher 1, and let's think about that a little bit. So what are the reasons behind my students' incapacity to develop speaking? I would actually suggest that maybe we need to slightly change the first question to what do students say are their difficulties with speaking in English, and we might think about what kind of situation. So a little bit more specific, maybe. So what kinds of what do students say are the reasons, or what do students say are the difficulties they have in speaking English? And if that's our question, I think we'd go back and we'd think about reflective writing, maybe, as a good way to answer that question. And let's move on to number 2, maybe teacher researcher number 2. again, what are the reasons for students' poor performance in English class? Well, I'd suggest that you need to work a little bit more on this question itself, and before you start to think what kind of data to get, I think the question needs to be a little bit more precise. So when you say poor performance, do you mean in speaking? Do you mean in maybe in writing? What sort of performance do you mean? And just make that a bit clearer. And so then again, I think I'd suggest that you have one question at least, which is what do students say are the reasons? Or what do students say is difficult, let's say, for writing or speaking or whatever it might be? We have another question. Okay, the problem here is students find it, this teacher feels that the students are poor at writing essays. They seem to be good at interacting in class, but they seem to find it difficult to write essays in English. Right, that's it's good. I think that you've made it focused on particular skill, right? Writing here, so we know what the focus is. And your questions are, yeah, why is essay writing a challenge for students? I would suggest actually, perhaps that I mean, you know, or you think you know that it's a challenge for the students, but how about just checking how students see essay writing by a little bit more open question, like what do students um, what do students say about essay writing? That's quite an open question. What do students say is good, as well as what is problematic, what is difficult for students? That could be a question. Again, reflective writing, maybe. Um, how does my teaching approach promote or hinder? I would suggest that question could be something like, what do I do now to try to improve their writing? And partly that could be writing some reflections about your approach to writing. Could also be taking some notes after your class about what you have done in the class to teach them writing, about behavior, isn't it? And this is also a kind of part of behavior or performance. What specific aspects of language do they need to improve in their writing? And maybe we should all think about that together a little bit, according to this data. So, according to that question, so what particular aspects of writing do they need to improve? What would you suggest for that? What kind of data would you suggest for answering that question from here? If you could write in the chat. I've lost my chat. So yeah, here we are. I would say, what are you saying? I think we'd say, wouldn't we, number 12? That was students' work or students' performance. In other words, you would need to get some examples of their work, and then you would analyze it. You would look at it and try to identify what are the particular problems with writing that they have. So I'm going to stop there. It's been an hour, and just to see if you have any questions or any comments. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Richard, for the information you shared with us. I really like this idea that we need to start first by exploring the problem, exploring what the students think about what we think they think before
Yeah,
we assume things. I remember I had the mentee last time in the program in the first round, and our first meeting, she came with the idea that her students are not motivated, the same exact problem we were talking about. And then through the discussion, we got to really reflect on her own teaching, on what the students actually do in her classes. She did her research first to see are they motivated or not, and then she discovered that they are facing language issues in the classroom. It's not about motivation at all.
yeah.
So it's really a very interesting and reflective process. that we go through by conducting classroom research.
Mm.
I'd like to ask our teachers here if you have any thoughts or questions that you'd like to ask Richard. Please go ahead. Yes, Yusreya.
Good evening, Richard. And sorry for starting with my voice like that. As I understand, that the teacher is going to decide the effects or the problems with students from their performance and decide evidences or collect evidences from their performance. They do that. And also, as more evidences come from a colleague or somebody else to prove that this is a real problem. This is what I thought is right.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think, yeah,
but in teaching, I think we always care about the activities. If I'm providing poor activities, I should look like, or I should check my activities, whether it's appropriate for the students, whether it's appropriate for the content I'm providing. If I did all this, so I get the same problem, so there is a real problem. But before I find out the performance, I should check my performance. I should check my preparation or planning for the lesson, whether I'm providing the correct or methodology appropriate for them, or designing the activities which is appropriate for them or not. So I think real problems comes from real evaluation.
yeah,
And according or based on our concept of evaluation, it's the exams, the scores of the students on tests or something like that. Because they are ready, they are memorizing, they are doing their best to do the right appropriate performance. So if it comes not correct, so there is a real problem with the student in this step or in this part of learning. Am I correct or not? Thank you.
yeah. Thanks, Yusra. Thank you. Yeah, I think you've understood what I'm talking about. Yeah, that I think from what I could understand, I think you're agreeing that we need to make sure that a problem that we perceive, is it really a problem or not? We need to have some other perspective. And I think Amira was also talking about that. That we as teachers, we view things from our perspective. You know, of course we do. We are human beings. All human beings see things from their own perspective. And then we act according to our perceptions. We act according to what we believe or what we see. Let's say what we see. But what we see, of course, is through our own eyes. It's through our own brains. It's through our own experience, and we don't see the whole reality. You know, and that's why we are um, recommending research. You know, why and actually why some teachers find it very useful, because problems that we see, problems that we see sometimes are not a problem from other people's perspectives, or things that we think are fine from other people's perspectives. Actually, there are some problems. That's the other side of it. So, and it's really interesting and useful to get these new perceptions. And I think you're also saying, so yes, it's evaluation. It's kind of evaluating the situation before we try to change the situation. I think that's the main point, because teachers are always trying to change things. Good teachers are always trying to improve the situation, but we are usually doing it all ourselves. You know, we think we see something, and then we try to change that. We think we see that something, and we try to change that. But actually, what I'm suggesting is stepping back before that, stepping back not just to reflect, but stepping back to actually get some other perspectives. Technical term is triangulation, getting like a triangle, getting other perspectives on the same issue. So you can see it in 3D, as it were. You can see the issue from different perspectives. And so students' performance, students' test results, that's one kind of data. Yeah. But there are all other ways, other things which are important, because students' perceptions are also important, or parents' perceptions are also important.
Thank you very much.
I think we have a question from Sandrine in the chat box asking, is it obligatory to start with exploring before we conduct research to find answers, or the teacher can choose not to do?
Yeah. So Sandrine's asking, because I talked a little bit about exploratory research, and that's what I've been talking about mostly. And I also talked about action research. And so Sandrine is asking, do we have to have exploratory research before we do action research? Do we have to do that exploration before we do action research? Well, it's for you to discuss with your mentor, for you to discuss inside this program that Africa ELTA is running, because very often action research happens without exploration, and so that's up to you and your mentor. What I'm suggesting from my experience is that exploring first is a solid, good foundation for action on top of that. That's what I'm suggesting from my experience and from my own perspective of what is valuable for teachers. But also, I've seen, for example, that some teachers find that exploration the most valuable because they're seeing things from a new perspective. They're learning a lot from having these new perspectives that I'm describing. I think the example Amira showed us was true. Sometimes things are surprising. Things are quite surprising because we believe something is something and things are different. So from my experience, and they find that quite empowering and quite liberating to see new things, and to at least to check that the problem that you think is a problem is really a problem from different perspectives. At least to check that. And there is a danger, I think, that the actions in action research come from somewhere else. They come from something you've read on the internet or something you've heard at a conference, and it's not necessarily relevant for your students. That's the danger. I think quite a lot of teachers try to do that. They find something, somebody else is suggesting something, and they want to go and try it out like an experiment. Well, that's okay, but shouldn't it be something coming from your context, something that's really related to your classroom and context? And exploration helps you to do that. And then your action, your suggestion, your solution is really going to be relevant to what you've discovered. So I'm trying to recommend that, but it's not obligatory. It's simply how I see things and how I've had experience with teachers. Yusra, you say, do we have to send me our questions? No, certainly not. This is a webinar, and I'm happy to for you to work together with your mentors, and from now on, and I've been very happy to help you if I can, but it's basically you and your mentors. So yes, as Amira replied in the chat, and thanks for your
You have to thank you very much because let's go deeper to find out what's happening during exploration of ideas and separation of evidences, and how also can we manage or control our thoughts to go direct to what we want to do.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Do you have any other questions before we end this webinar? Okay, I think that's it. So, Richard, I'd like to thank you very much for supporting the Africa ELTA research program in the previous round and also in this one. Like what Harry said last time, I'd like to reiterate our thanks at Africa ELTA. We have benefited a lot from the 2 sessions you have offered us. I would like to also ask for your permission to post this one also on the Africa ELTA YouTube,
Yes,
so we
that's
can
fine.
share it also with our wider membership.
Sure,
Uh,
yeah, if it's helpful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria. Thanks for inviting me again, and best wishes to all of you for your teacher research.
Thank you very much. And thanks, everyone.